demarcated buckets of explanation has its advantages. For example, it can help you remember.
All right, so I actually wanted to do kind of a short little basic review of some of the stuff I had issues with on the A plus exam dealing with processors. The first thing that you're going to have general issues with, or I'm going to have issues with personally, is you're expected to understand AMD architecture and Intel architecture to the point to where you know what processor can go in what slot, and this is like offhand, and you're going to be expected to know how to read the AMD and Intel processor specs. The Intel ones are really easy. I'll go over that. AMD is a little more tricky, which is why, personally, when I buy stock, I don't buy AMD stock. All right, so CPU architecture in smartphones. Smartphones matter. They're the future. So anybody that's done computer repair will tell you it's really hard to maintain a good income just doing computer repair. You probably have to do some cell phone stuff on the side. CPU architecture in smartphones is called ARM. So again, speaking about Intel, they released their first i7 in the summer of 2008. This will be the beginning of their current generation of processors. So that's why that's important. Okay, so some of you have dealt with this if you're gamers. So throttling is the process of saving energy by limiting what the CPU can do. So it makes the CPU run more slowly. If you're going to unthrottle it, if you're going to jailbreak the processor like that, you definitely want to make sure that the cooling is going to compensate for this, right? Clock speed. Clock speed is the bus speed times the multiplier. So the bus speed, the multiplier is going to be like in megahertz, and the bus speed will be a certain number of clock cycles, and that will generate your clock speed. So let me look at this example here just to let you in on it. All right, so this example here. For example, a system with an external clock of 100 megahertz and a 36 times clock multiplier will have an internal CPU clock of 3.6 gigahertz. So a CPU with a 10 times multiplier will thus see 10 internal cycles for every external clock cycle. So parallel execution is when CPUs can process multiple commands in parallel instead of one at a time. So the way CPUs work now is they utilize pipelining, and pipelining organizes the circuits in a conveyor belt fashion. With pipelining, each stage does its job with each clock cycle pulse. And CPU pipelines can be broken up sometimes as many as into as many as 20 stages, so quite a lot. Two kinds of units make up the processor: the arithmetic logic unit, which deals with whole numbers, and then you have your floating point unit, which deals with more complex numbers. So those are the two arithmetic units that make up the actual processor in terms of jobs. All right, so what causes slowdowns? What do you want to avoid from a processor? Pipeline stalls. Pipeline stalls are wait states because the RAM cannot keep up with the processor, so you always want to make sure that that's copacetic. To reduce wait states, CPUs come with high-speed RAM called static RAM, SRAM. So SRAM performs caching. Okay, SRAM preloads as many instructions as possible. SRAM keeps copies of already run instructions and data. All right, so there are three caches generally that you have to deal with on a processor. The L1 cache, which is on the CPU. You're going to have the L2 cache, which is on the motherboard, and it's used second. So your L1 cache gets used first, smallest, fastest. L2 cache gets used next, and guess what? It's bigger and a little bit slower. And the L3 cache is going to be the largest and slowest. It's going to be the third in your order of use. So hyperthreading enables chips to run multiple threads at the same time. So this is a common technology now. It didn't used to be. So Intel processors, a good example about how intuitive it is. So you have an Intel Core i7 5775C processor. Okay, so you have your brand name, Intel Core. i7. That's the brand modifier. Your SKU, you've got your 5th generation, which is the first digit. That's the 5. 775 is the SKU number. The C is the alpha suffix, and it indicates it's a desktop processor with integrated graphics. And the socket's going to be LGA1150 for that alpha suffix. Because if that alpha suffix is different, you're dealing with something maybe without integrated graphics, maybe something that's a laptop chip, in which case it's going to be different. Most sockets, if you've ever done PC repair and you just literally pick up the arm, right? Pop it out, put your processor in, close it, put your thermal paste on, put your fan on top of it, and screw it in. That's a ZIF, zero insertion port socket. Now you're gonna obviously those are gonna be the most common because if you're dealing with delicate internal components, why in the hell would you want it to require any kind of force? I can only imagine back in the day dealing with some of those computers in the 80s. So this is a basic overview of some of the concepts I had to understand in order to really get my head around this. You'll see here an example of North Bridge versus South Bridge. Your extended data bus here is on the South Bridge, dealing with all this. Got your BIOS, right? This is an example of a thread. Scheduler being part of the operating system, deciding what goes where. This would be the difference between single and multi-threading. So single threading, running one command at a time. These commands that go across the clock wire, these lines, these single commands, and the clock wire is active until they're completed. And once they're completed, that completes the clock cycle. But the concept of a command, it's going to be in machine language. All right, so it's a low-level programming language. Probably hex. I'm not certain. It is going to be in hex. Machine language is basically hex. Now, we're used to discussing when we talk about programming high-level languages. And a lot of these languages, to be honest, they're pre-cooked. You can find examples of C++ or C Sharp. When I go in and I do a CLI routine in Windows Server or AWS, whatever I need, I'm probably going to be able to find it online. But this machine language is quite different. If you dealt with Lisp in any fashion, it's close to machine language. It's like kind of in between the two. If you dealt with Lisp, I'm sorry. It's crazy. I just so happen to have segued into that small niche at one point. So single threading is the opposite of multi-threading. Now, multi-threading is found in many operating systems, so yeah, that's kind of standard now. Here's some examples you've all seen a chip, and this is the cycle, right? Fetch, decode, execute. ALU, cache, clock rate. Here's a example of bus here in terms of what it means in computing. What a register is. So yeah, it's just an overview of terms of what you will what you will be looking at and dealing with that concept on the A plus exam, and those are things that I had trouble with. So anytime I do these videos, essentially my MO is I go through the book. I'm gonna do another one on BIOS. I'm gonna do one on BIOS. I'm gonna do one on RAM. Okay, because I've been over the RAM chapter a couple of times, but anytime I cannot, off the top of my head, answer the question at the end of the chapter, that's when I look at that and I go through, and any of the very detailed stuff I may not have covered in the course because I took the course and made an A, I will redo. And I haven't had a lot of A plus questions in job interviews, but I recently had some, so it behooves me to know that.